Hello and welcome everybody to this packed 1-hour webinar where we'll be talking about some of the things you can do to improve access to treatments for people with advanced breast cancer. I'm Anna Wagstaff. I'm a health journalist with a special interest in everything that has to go right to get patients access to treatment and care that they need. And I'll be chairing this session. It's my job to keep everyone in time, so I'll be rushing through this introduction to set a good example. We do have a truly magnificent lineup of speakers here today. Between them, they have a great range of experience, and they will be sharing knowledge and insights that we hope you will find useful for your own efforts to improve access to treatments where you are. But they don't know what you know. They don't know your health systems as you do, and the daily realities that face patients trying to get the care that they need. They don't know the state of cancer advocacy where you are, what conversations are being had, where and with whom. They don't know your patient community and they can't represent an advocate for them as you do. So this webinar is about bringing their international expertise and your local expertise together. Each of them has been asked to speak for no more than 6 minutes to allow enough time for discussion. I'm going to say a few words about the chat. The chat is open for everyone to share comments and ask questions. Please do use it. We do need to hear from you. To open it, you click on the icon that says chat at the bottom of your screen. You can type questions and comments at the bottom of that panel. We have someone checking out the questions as we go along. If your question is aimed at a particular speaker, please do make that clear. It could also be helpful for you to say where you are from. We aim to have at least 15 minutes discussion time at the end, so keep your questions coming. Let me introduce the speakers. First up is Fatima Cardoso. Now, Fatima is the one person on the panel who I know needs no introduction. I'll mention anyway that she is the founder and president of the ABC Global Alliance and the ABC International Consensus Guidelines. In this webinar, Fatima's role will be to outline the size of the problem in lower and middle income settings that patients with advanced breast cancer face getting the treatments they need. Fatima is the only one allowed to speak about problems. The speakers who follow are all charged only with telling us about solutions. Pat Garcia-Gonzalez, our second speaker, will be encouraging you all to ask the right questions. Pat is founder and director of the Max Foundation, which acts as a command and control center for delivering global access to medication, technology and services to patients facing cancer and other critical illnesses. Max Foundation initially worked on a global access program for Gleevec, a drug that transformed the prospects of most patients with a specific type of leukemia. It has low toxicity, it's easy to store, distribute and take, and above all, it is cheap to make. So of course, ensuring global access was easy. Only it wasn't. So Pat's experience facing unexpected barriers and finding ways to address them made her and her team exceptionally well placed to start tackling access to breast cancer treatments 3 years ago and offer insights and advice to us all today. Pat is also on the executive committee of ATOM, the Access to Oncology Medicines Coalition, so she will focus mainly on low and low middle income country settings. Next up will be Ranjit Kaur, who will talk about learning and adapting for local success. Now, Ranjit is a breast cancer survivor and advocate in Malaysia. She will be speaking from a perspective similar to most of our audience here today, because hers is a history of advocating for better access to diagnostics, treatment and care, particularly for patients with breast cancer within her own country. She plays a leadership role in many national, regional and international cancer advocacy bodies. And that says something about the importance of networking and forming alliances. Ranjit will talk about some of the wins they've made in Malaysia and how they were won. Malaysia is an upper middle income country, which, as Ranjit will explain, comes with its own problems. We then have Vanessa Peberdy, who will talk about opportunities for advocates to work together with pharmaceutical companies to fight for patient access to treatments. Vanessa leads on NCD policy and advocacy at the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, where she has a specific focus on access to medicines in lower and middle income countries. Many companies work with patient advocacy groups to overcome barriers to access and support local health systems strengthening. This includes gathering and using evidence that demonstrates unmet patient needs or maybe gaps in infrastructure, such as imaging and biomarker testing, and supporting local participation in clinical trials. Vanessa will speak about some existing collaborations to achieve this and perhaps touch on some examples of success. Last up, we're delighted to have with us Andre Ilbawi, who's doing a fantastic job leading the cancer program at the World Health Organization. Andre will be joining us later. He's not here just yet, I think. He will talk about some of the work he's been involved in, working with governments across the globe to transform access to cancer treatments. While the WHO's current focus is particularly on childhood cancers, the conversations are the same. They're about national health plans, cancer control plans, essential medicines lists, conversations where breast cancer advocates need to make their voices heard, and about national guidelines, which is where the clinicians need to get engaged. That's my 6 minutes up, so I will jump straight in. Fatima.
Thank you, Anna. I'll just wait for my slides to be up. I'm going to rush through them before you kick me out. So I'm the only one allowed to mention the problem. So I know that everybody's very aware of the problem. So let's go just focus on the findings of our latest Global Decade Report. And just 2 seconds to say what we have done as ABC Global Alliance. We have looked at what happened in the last decade, 2015 to 2025, in various areas, always focusing on metastatic breast cancer. And obviously, access to care was one of those areas. And it will be my job to show you the findings of this report. And we can always compare to the findings of our first global report that covered 2005 to 2015. So what this report shows is that we did improve a couple of things, fortunately, in this last decade. However, there are still a lot of gaps and inequities that need to be addressed. I will only show you the findings of 2 goals because they are very connected. Goal number 1 was to improve survival. And what we have seen in this last decade is that the median 5-year survival has improved from 26 to 33%. And you can say, well, that's still very little. True, but the previous decade, we only had a change of 2%. So it was already something. And what we can see is that because of the availability of targeted agents for 2 of the 3 subtypes of breast cancer, and these are the hormonal dependent and the HER2 positive, we now can have a median survival that goes beyond 5 years. Of course, this is only in some regions and with access to the targeted therapies. And we also now have comprehensive international high-quality guidelines, and we also know that that improves survival. However, what have we seen that still are gaps? The survival gap between the 3 breast cancer subtypes is increasing because we haven't improved the survival of triple negative. It remains stable at about 13 months. We also see that the results presented in clinical trials, they are not always replicated in real-world settings, and we can then discuss why this happens. And the most important part is that to achieve these benefits in survival, we have to have access to the newest therapies, and this is very unequal. So a little bit more of data, focus on the right part of the slide. This is the evolution of 5-year survival, so percentage of patients with metastatic breast cancer that are alive at 5 years. And you see the 90s and then the first decade of the 2000s and the second decade, slowly but steadily improving. Nothing compared with early breast cancer, unfortunately. And here you see a very recent study looking into real-world data, and the curve that you see below in blue, almost no change, is the triple negative survival. While in the others, you see there is an up curve, So an improvement in survival for the other two subtypes. Now moving to goal number 9, accessibility. What have we seen in this decade? In many countries, there was the inclusion of the essential medicines list from WHO in the National Cancer Plan. It doesn't mean that being there necessarily is accessible to all patients, but it is a one step forward. We have also seen innovative global partnerships, and you will hear more about that on how to improve access in low middle income countries.
2 minutes, Fatima.
We have also seen an improved radiation capacity in some parts of Europe and in Africa. However, we see that there is very different timely access to both diagnosis, particularly in low middle income countries, to treatment, particularly to the targeted expensive therapies, and the problem of very high out-of-pocket expenses that goes up until 60%. So you see here the increase of costs of treating metastatic breast cancer, and I just want to call your attention to this graphic: out-of-pocket expenses, medications, and side effect medications. So if you take a treatment and you have side effects, usually it comes out of your own pocket. And this is just to remind you that also pain control, which is in the bottom right of the slide, is very unequal throughout the world. So the last point I want to make is look at here, access to medication for palliative and supportive care. You see the difference from low middle income countries, a little bit over 50% of patients have access, while in high income countries is over 80%. That, of course, leads to a huge impact in the financial security of the patient and the family. And last but not least, participation in clinical trials is much, much lower in low middle income countries. And this would be a possibility of access to innovative therapies. And with that, I present you the new goals for the decade moving forward. And you can see that goal number 9, improve accessibility, is still very much one of our goals. Thank you very much.
Fatima, that was absolutely perfectly on time. And thank you so much for setting out those problems so clearly before we move on to the next speakers, who are all going to talk now about solutions. So don't forget, everybody, questions in the panel as you go along. I'd now like to introduce Pat, and Pat is going to ask you all to be asking the right questions. Pat.
Thank you, Anna, so much, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to start by sharing that the Max Foundation was established in the memory of Max, and Max was my stepson, and he was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia when he was 14, and he couldn't have access to the treatment he needed, and we lost him when he was 17. And it's always important for me to explain, because this is the Max Foundation, even 25 years later, we're very, very much focused on the patient and the families. And we aim to bring access to these innovative treatments to people in the world that otherwise don't have access. We have provided access to treatment to more than 115,000 patients. We have provided close to 700,000 years of life, and I'm proud that in the last 3 years, with the support of the ABC Global Alliance, we have helped almost 1,000 breast cancer patients have access to treatment. But of course, there's so much more to do. Our approach is one of a human-centered strategy in our experience for patients in low-income countries who do not have access to treatment. The first and most important thing you can provide is the treatment, which many times, but not always, is a specific drug. However, it's equally important to understand that availability of these medications in these countries is not enough to provide access. It can be a catalyst, but enabling access to treatment is much more than making medicine available. And it's something we need to understand. The multitude of levels of barriers to access requires a very holistic approach. If we want to achieve health equity and eliminate survival disparities, we need to put in place systems that are sustainable for patients. We need to tackle diagnostics infrastructure and capacity building, as well as we have to eliminate social determinants of health. And that's, we need to put these comprehensive systems in place. So nobody can do this alone, and certainly we don't. We work with more than 900 partners. The ABC Global Alliance has been, as I said, a critical partner with us, not only because of the knowledge and expertise all of you have, but also because of the strong presence of the patient voice in the Alliance. And having this diversity of partners and supporters enables us to custom build strategies for each country to overcome many of the barriers that prevent patients and their families from reaching and sustaining their treatment. So let's talk about some of the interventions, many of which can be led by patient organizations. And a critical area of focus is diagnostics. Lack of diagnostic infrastructure is typically the #1 barrier for patients once medicines are available. And it's understandable because until medicines are available, no physician wants to diagnose a patient that they cannot treat. So it's only when you make the medicine available, then there's a need to strengthen the diagnostics. We work with experts to support local labs to develop strong diagnostic protocols and build their capabilities to enable patients to be diagnosed.
2 minutes,
However,
Pat.
yes, however, elevating health systems requires a deep understanding of the patient journey so that interventions can be created to overcome these barriers. And I believe that mapping the patient journey can uniquely be done by local patient advocates. And I believe that this is a low-hanging fruit where we can add great value by working together. Now, a second very important area of support is patient support, and can be broadly defined, let's say, as accompaniment, walking with the patient side by side, continuously supporting them. And we have found that patients need many different types of support. One important area involves personal coaching, where patients can receive one-on-one support. And another very valued area is peer-to-peer approach, and patient group meetings when families can receive education and interact with each other. The third area of support is transportation. Patients so many times abandon treatment because they don't have the funds for the transportation to the hospital. So in partnership with patient organizations in several countries, and based on available funds, we can provide travel grants to offset the cost of transportation to and from the hospital. And finally, but not only, patient education, of course, and disease education is so important. And I think patient organizations are uniquely poised to develop these patient-friendly materials. And this is another area of potential engagement with us, because we are not the experts in breast cancer, you are. So I'll stop here, Anna, and send it back to you.
Perfect timing again, Pat. We're doing so well. I think that, like you say, advocates are the ones who can do human-centered advocacy. And I don't think anyone has ever packed 6 minutes worth of so many practical things that can be done. So I really do hope that people will find some of those useful from Pat. Really, you can hear that has been based on experience. So thanks very much for that. I'd like to now introduce Ranjit. She's talking about learning and adapting for local success. As I said, Ranjit is quite close to what most of you advocates are. Her experience is working inside one country and advocating with some success for breast cancer patients and access for treatment. So Ranjit, and everyone, please do remember questions and comments.
Thank you,
Off
Anna.
you go.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening to everyone. Like Anna said, with some success, because it's always an uphill journey for us in the low and middle income countries. Now, the National Cancer Society of Malaysia improves access to medicines through numerous programs and collaborations that provide subsidized and affordable medications, financial assistance, and support services to cancer patients. Now, we have a couple of programs under this, and there is the Patient Access Program, which actually offers financial assistance and access to high-cost, innovative cancer drugs and essential medicines at a reduced price. The organization uses patient means testing to determine eligibility and also to ensure that cost does not become a barrier to completing treatment. Now, there are other private hospitals and organizations that offer patient-assisted programs as well for cancer patients, especially for those with advanced cancers. We also do strategic partnership with industry partners to secure affordable medicines. For example, a recent collaboration with Biocon Biologics has actually provided an opportunity for affordable biosimilars for cancer patients, particularly targeted therapies for advanced breast cancer patients as well. And this collaboration actually needed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding between the National Cancer Society and the industry partner to emphasize a commitment in improving patient-centric healthcare. So there are also other programs, but it's not, I mean, there isn't enough time for us. But the other area that I would like to address is advocating for access to cancer care, which actually included a program where the country was going through GST, or goods and service taxes, for all goods. And even drugs, like cancer drugs, were being taxed under the GST rating. So we, under the Together Against Cancer, which is an advocacy organization, and at that time I was the president in 2016, when they first started the GST for everything. And we then we wrote to the Minister of Finance, who was also the Prime Minister at that time, to make GST zero rated for cancer drugs and for all drugs that are prescriptive, so that they can actually be affordable for patients. And there was an immediate response from the Prime Minister, and we gained that. We were very successful, and it was quite a feather in our cap to say, okay, now individuals with cancer and other medical conditions can use prescriptive drugs at a lower cost. But that's not enough. There is still so much to be done in the country. So we are always mindful. We are always tracking to see what is going on in the country. But one of the areas that we are really, truly battling is financial toxicity in the country. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Ranjit. Beautifully to time. You surprised me there. And can I welcome Andre? Thank you for managing to join us. But before we go to Andre, I'll be introducing you to Vanessa. Vanessa is from the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, and she's going to talk a bit about how patients can work with pharmaceutical companies on advocating for access. Vanessa.
Thanks, Anna, and it's lovely to be here. A real privilege. So yeah, I was asked to talk very much about sort of the industry and our relationship with patient advocates. So that's what I want to kind of touch upon at the beginning. I think it's safe to say that, you know, there is a big common goal between us, which often is underappreciated, and that is better health outcomes, better care, improved healthcare systems. We want the same things ultimately. Patients are very important to us at industry because they are what I would call the ultimate end user. Their lived experience, what does and what doesn't work, is unique and crucial to us. And I think where there is alignment between our industry and patients and what is of greatest importance, and what needs ultimately reimbursing. It's very difficult for policymakers to ignore us when we're kind of, singing off the same page. I want to talk kind of briefly about 3 real life examples. I was asked to kind of try and bring some practical solutions. It was, as Anna said, where ourselves at IFPMA and industry and our member companies are involved. A reminder to those of you on the line that, of course, as the trade association, we represent innovative pharma, but we are not the ones on the ground. It is very much our member companies that are directly on the ground with patient advocates. So we're kind of speaking, in that sense, with 2 different hats, one more from a policy perspective, but one where we're talking about what our companies are getting up to. The first thing I wanted to mention is something that we're doing in terms of WHO, and I see Andre's here. We're a new member of WHO's Global Clinical Trials Forum, GCTF, and that works with various partners to address challenges that countries have in introducing and expanding clinical trial networks and sites and sharing best practices. There's actually a working group within GCTF specifically that works on patient and community engagement that looks at how patient involvement can strengthen clinical trial infrastructure. So we're a part of that overall movement. Another thing I wanted to talk about is an initiative called IQN Path. That brings together research, clinical stakeholders, patient representatives, global healthcare associations, health economists, and industry representatives like ourselves. And the aim there is very much to accelerate the implementation of precision oncology on a global scale, but very much with a focus on low and middle income countries. That's a project that's literally ongoing as we speak. The idea is to have the end product be an action plan that will transform, hopefully, precision medicine into reality for many cancer patients around the world. And the roadmap is going to set out steps that are needed to ensure patient access to appropriate therapies adapted to different healthcare system contexts. So looking at different countries with different resource requirements. So hopefully that roadmap will really be able to come up with some very practical recommendations that we hope collectively we can take forward. Lastly, one of our companies, Roche, is an anchor partner in a really exciting initiative that's been led by a biotech company called Yemachi, and that's based in Ghana. Their ambition is to build what they call the African Cancer Atlas, or TACA, T-A-C-A, which is really aiming to address the sort of underrepresentation of African genomic data in global cancer research. The sort of big goal there is to create the world's first comprehensive cancer genomic database that's focused on African populations. And so Roche, the member company, is bringing its technical input and its support via its own African genomics program into that initiative. So lots going on, and I may literally skim the surface, mindful that I also have 6 minutes, and I'm sure Anna's going to start giving me a 2-minute reminder in a second. But, I just wanted to say that in terms of practical asks, because that's the other thing, I've obviously spoken about things that we work on as the member companies, as IFPMA, as a trade association, with the breadth of partners. Obviously we need to work together. And I think, Anna and Adele, we may touch upon this later on in the call, but I just wanted to say that there's so much that we can be doing together, and I'm really excited by the prospect of being able to leverage some of the initiatives that we're involved in and to work much more closely with the patient advocates so that we're transforming, recommendations and policy tools. They're not things that just sit on a shelf collecting dust, that ultimately patient advocates have a huge role to play in helping us to kind of translate that and to work with governments and to help them understand what is achievable, what is feasible, what can be covered and funded, so that we can ultimately improve infrastructure, for precision oncology, but of course cancer writ large. So with that, I'm also going to stop, Anna, and avoid the 2-minute reminder. But back to you. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that. That was an awful lot to digest in one go, and I think that you'll get more from Andre in a minute. But I think one of the things that is clear from what's being said here is that a lot of this is not specifically just advanced breast cancer treatments, that it is a question also of linking in with all sorts of efforts going on to generally improve access to precision medicines as a whole, and that's a way to make alliances. So that, I think, may be something that Andre now we'll also talk about. Andre, I did introduce you before you came, but everyone knows that you're here. You're the person who is leading on cancer in WHO and are doing an absolutely magnificent job. And you are the person who talks to governments, you and your team, has access to governments, gives them an advice And so you have that power that all advocates wish they had of actually having that interaction. So it's really helpful for you to be able to talk to advocates about what you do and what they can do to help the work that WHO is doing with government. So please do go ahead.
Thanks, Anna. What a generous introduction, and to also reinforce that all of us have the power. You know, WHO is not a standalone agency, and indeed, it's the advocates that move all of us, including WHO, as an intergovernmental organization. So, being conscientious of the time, I do want to pause and appreciate this group, the ABC Alliance. Thank you first and foremost for the invitation, and all the partners of this powerful coalition, the people with whom I'm sharing the panel discussion. Who are in fact colleagues and in many ways friends. For the next 5 minutes, I just want to share a bit about how we at WHO approach this critical challenge of access to cancer medicines with, as Vanessa said so well, the same intent, which is how do we empower communities and improve access for all. Now, when we start with the question about access to cancer medicines, the general instinct is to ask, well, are these medicines available in my hospital pharmacy? And that's an understandable starting point. But the problem is that we are beginning to see the broader context under which this question is being asked. In some ways, it's like being asked to describe a tree by looking at one leaf. The hospital pharmacy is at the end of the medicine journey and at the end of the value chain. So to understand this question of how do we improve access, we have to go from the bedside back to the bench. Medicine in the hospitals reach there through a robust supply chain that must be in place. These were products selected by governments, found through a tender, purchased after a specialized pricing approach, evaluated, approved, monitored by regulators, quantified, and included in supply planning. And of course, we also need to think all the way upstream, which is how are these products developed and who has access to them in clinical trials. Once we frame that, we began to see the access question more of a dynamic matrix. Within there, that's not a justification to say we don't have anything to do or worry about. In fact, it gives specificity to what we can do and what we can do effectively. So let's look at it from three stakeholder provider lenses. The first one being, excuse me, it seems the computer stopped sharing. Reshare the screen. So the first stakeholder provider lens to focus on is that of advocates. Of course, as we heard Anna say, WHO has a presence in the global landscape, but what really is powerful is the capabilities of advocates. So if I could narrow that process from the leaf to the trunk, where is it that advocates can leverage their power, their capabilities, and have an impact on that value chain? There are effectively two levers. The first is by developing and specifying within communities what are the most important problems. Because we can talk about cancer access in a broad term. Of course, we heard today about the financial constraints, but there's so much more. Are patients or people affected confident as to whether the medicine is quality assured? Do they have the assurance that there won't be a stock out? Do they have the assurance that the provider is trained in how to deliver it and monitor toxicities? All of these questions are fundamental to a advocacy campaign that is fit for purpose. So understanding what are the concerns of the community is perhaps one of the most powerful tools, asking the question of, do you know where your medicines came from? And that is a starting point for a discussion to realize that there's much more that we can do. The second is advocates have a voice, and that voice should be heard everywhere. In the cancer community, we often talk about cancer control plans. Of course, cancer control plans are powerful instruments, but there's so many other opportunities for policy intervention. Are we at the table when governments decide what to include in a benefit package, meaning what the insurance schemes will cover? If we're not at the table, we can't be surprised if the answer is no. Are we there when governments decide on the national EML, decide on what medicines to procure and what quantities? Again, this is the opportunity. And being aware of that, as Anna said very well, identifying who are the other stakeholders who will advocate with us to be present at the table. That's the opportunity, because a cancer plan is one instrument. But we have to be available at all moments, or we run the risk of not being in that policy environment. As we heard from Anna, you do not stand alone. Please reach out to WHO when you hear that these dialogues are happening. If you want to be at the table, let's push together and introduce the voice of advocates into these strategic discussions. Now, a next stakeholder group, we know many of you are clinicians. The general passive response is, well, what can we do? We receive the medicines and that's the end of it. In fact, it's not. Similarly, there are 2, 3 major instruments that clinicians can use to influence the access agenda. First and foremost, most hospitals have treatment standards that are applied, but that doesn't mean that they're national treatment standards. And that can be problematic because in the absence of national treatment standards, we run the risk of variations in quality of care. A simple analogy is we talk about MDTs for individual care, people affected by cancer. What we need is a national MDT. Each hospital telling their side of their story, contributing what are the bottlenecks, and recognizing that if hospitals work together, we get improved quality of care, improved efficiency, greater equity, and usually earlier adoption and uptake of technologies. So does your country have national guidelines? Are you contributing to that dialogue? Second, we all as providers have the capability to influence clinical trials. If innovation is not happening in your neighborhood, then we all have to fear that innovation will not be accessible to your neighborhood for years, if not decades ahead. Every hospital, every country has the capability to invest in clinical trials, and we have to see that as a clinician's lever. That is a starting point for a discussion of how do we get earlier access to essential medicines and technologies. And then, of course, all providers should be confident saying, if you are concerned that a product is substandard or falsified, raise a flag. Through WHO, through partner networks, there are labs that will test the medicine and give you the feedback as to whether there are impurities or other concerns about the products themselves. We have to empower clinicians to recognize these capabilities within that. Again, please reach out to us at WHO through your ministry or through you as individual providers, because we can help respond to these concerns and facilitate processes like national treatment standards. Now, this is a very easy slide to present, but in many ways, what you see is a list, which is unfair. If you ask, what is WHO doing in access to cancer medicines? Of course, we're working to improve access. You can see some of the instruments, the QR codes. There were 7 other QR codes that I was going to put on the screen, but I want to spare you of that. These lists don't mean anything until they hit your community. But please be assured, within the past year, we worked with 20 governments to improve treatment standards, to inform their national essential medicines list, to include cancer and benefit packages. We've helped dispense 2 million medicines last year alone. Together, we are moving mountains. The opportunity is there, and I want to acknowledge people on the call like Max, the Max Foundation and Pat, who have set the foundation for all of us to create a better legacy for access to cancer medicines. We can do this together, and please be assured that WHO is actually quite active all the way upstream from helping inform target product profiles through regulatory aspects, essential medicines list, and of course, procurement support as well. So please don't see this as a list, but as an assurance that we are there with you wherever in the field or in the communities that you are. Last slides for just some brief reflection. When we talk about access, let's look at it through the lens of what's available in the hospital, but recognize that there's a much broader tree that we have to address, and we can only address it together. Advocates are the starting point. We do not need to look any further than what happened in communicable diseases, HIV as a simple example of that. All of that came because advocates asked for something different. This is something we can do together. And clinicians, you are, as we just heard, the ambassadors of access. So how do we stand together and present a shared vision? And this is why this meeting, it's important that we hear from you in the remaining minutes that are left, because that vision needs to be presented together. But the good news is we're not starting with nothing. We at WHO work alongside you. It's a privilege to be here along associations from the private sector like IFPMA. Thank you, Vanessa, for acknowledging the relationship that we have with you, because we need to see this together. We can all work upstream and downstream from market shaping to procurement support and see the benefits increasingly on millions of people around the world. So let's do that. Let's do that together. And please also know that this is not a webinar for us. This is a dialogue that we want to see continue, and we're very pleased to be part of it. Thank you, Anna. Back to you.
Thank you so much. I was over generous with you there, Andre, because I love listening to you and because the WHO is such an important part of all of this. And I would absolutely echo what you're saying. This has to be a dialogue. And I fear it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes for advocates to hear so many conversations, so many organizations, so many initiatives happening. But I also think that sometimes we can spend too much time looking at the problems that we're facing and talking to each other about them, and that it's a question of standing back and saying, hey guys, look what's out there, and literally listing and saying which of these can we work with, because there are conversations that are deciding your access, and they are taking place, and a lot of them are taking place without you. And I think the one thing that I take away from all of this is a lot of them are not just about advanced breast cancer treatments. And I think that poses a bit of a question about how much you have to also spread out into wider alliances. And that's a question at some point that I would like to ask, but I'll start by asking some of the ones coming from the participants here. So a question from the Middle East here. How practical is it to expect the insights about bridging gaps in cancer care to apply in different countries? So in other words, can you copy over from what's happening in Malaysia to the Middle East? And maybe we'll start with Ranjit, because I know you work internationally as well as nationally. Would you like to start by answering that, Ranjit?
I suppose you can, because we have similar issues. When we have similar issues, we can learn from one another. And sometimes when we have conferences, we actually share with each other what's going on in our countries, and then it could be emulated in other countries. I'm sure it can be done, because when it comes to low and middle income countries, there will be innovative programs that can actually be used in other countries as well. And this is one. Like a webinar like this is another important avenue for us to share what we are doing in different parts of the world. Pat has come up with what happens in low income countries, where they are actually distributing medication to people there. So I think that we can use, and partnerships are very important. So it's not just doing it alone. You need to have partners, whether it is the industry or it is other NGOs or even governments. It can be done. So yes, it can be emulated.
Pat, do you want to add anything? And can I just say to all the panelists, if you've got something to add, if you'd like to come in, just raise your hand like this, and I'll bring you in.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree with Ranjit, of course, that we can learn from each other. But also, I think there are no circumstances the same. So we have to take the learnings, but look at our own situation. And this is where I think that patient advocates are in a very, very unique position of what I say with mapping the patient journey. Often is, as you said before I spoke, what are the right questions to ask? And I feel that how you frame the problem is how you come up with solutions. And there are many ways to frame the problem. And, for us, it has been a very important learning experience to try to improve access to breast cancer medicines, and going all the way to what is the first problem you have to tackle? How far down the patient journey do you need to go? And it is often that we don't get to the bottom of where does the first problem start, that then we come up with a wrong solution and we still cannot provide access. So I think that, I think we have to keep working on agreeing together what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And it's trickier than one would think.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. I've got another question here. What advice is there for obtaining access to clinical trials in lower middle income countries? I don't know. Yeah.
Anna, can I just make a comment?
Yes,
I did raise my hand.
Oh, it's a little yellow one. Sorry, I missed that.
No, I was just complimenting what Pat was saying, that you may think that just giving the medicine solves the problem, but it doesn't, and the advocates are fundamental to tell us what are the barriers, that even when the medicines are there, what are the barriers for the medicines to reach the patient? Pat mentioned, for example, transportation, but there are other barriers that are not linked to having the medicines in the country. And for example, for many of these medicines that change survival, you need a proper diagnosis. And if you don't have access to pathology, or if pathology is out of pocket, then you can't have a proper diagnosis. You can't have access to the treatment, even if it exists in your own country. And so the role of the patients, the patient advocates, to show you where are the bottlenecks in each individual country is fundamental, because there are many things some of them we never thought about it, and they are major hurdles for us to be able to give the treatment to the patient.
So that comes again down to know your problems, look at where the actual problems are, ask the right questions. Andre.
Yeah, thanks. So I think this is particularly a point that we can agree on. What is important to also reflect on is what is the process by which we do that? When we think about solving problems, sending signals early to the Ministry of Health policymakers is important because they may have a recommendation on how to gather data or how to initiate the process that will enable a dialogue to happen afterwards. So, for example, convening a set of affected women by breast cancer and presenting to the ministry a survey result can be powerful. But if it is done with the input, with the endorsement of the Ministry of Health, it becomes even more powerful. So bring the ministries early. Of course, we know cancer control plans, as I was saying, is the instrument for engagement. But often governments are ready and having background discussions on cancer policies above and beyond those cancer plans. So working with ministries to say, we want to do, as part of the action plan, a deeper dive on breast cancer care. And this is how we want to approach it. That's where you can be. Because if the recommendation is let's find the problem and discuss how to solve it, but it's being done in isolation from other actors in that ecosystem of access to medicines, it won't get the buy-in and endorsement that ultimately results in a shared problem and then a shared solution. That's the process that we want to help promote, which is bring stakeholders on board early on. If you want to know the problem, try to define the problem with advocates at the center, but with the endorsement of other key stakeholders that will then buy into the solution.
So I think that's great advice. Know who's making the decisions, where are the conversations happening, talk to them first, and then go and get the data that you need to be part of that conversation on behalf of advanced breast cancer patients. So that's a brilliant bit of advice. Shall we move on to the question of access to clinical trials now? Is there anyone who's got something to say about advice for obtaining access to clinical trials in low middle income countries?
I can start just by reminding people that, again, that clinical trials is just another example where just having the treatment is not sufficient. Because for the clinical trial, you need, again, to have a proper infrastructure, proper pathology, proper imaging, and a system to collect the data. Now, what they can be, if I can use this word, is an excuse to develop that infrastructure. So by wanting to participate in trials and have through them access to new treatments, then there is a push for hospital administrations, Minister of Health, to provide all the infrastructure that is necessary to run the clinical trial. Very often, and I'm sure Vanessa can tell her point of view, but very often it's not that the companies don't want to go there, is that there are not enough infrastructure to run the clinical trial. So that is why it's so important to have everything that surrounds the diagnosis of clinical trial and the following of the patient within a clinical trial.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I can come in here. I see Ranjit's got a hand up as well, but just following on from Fatima. Indeed, you're right, Fatima. I mean, you know, it isn't that companies don't want to be doing clinical trials in many of these settings. I think there's still some ways to go in terms of building that infrastructure. But I did speak briefly about the African Cancer Atlas, which is the initiative coming out and being led by academics in Ghana. And that's really exciting stuff because I think that, you know, that just demonstrates that there is real movement now in low middle income country settings. There is the use. I see a question on AI and digital progress. I think that we cannot underestimate there's some real drive to use AI and innovation in settings that are more resource constrained that we may not actually be thinking is happening, but it really is. And there's a lot of momentum picking up there. I did speak to the person running the TACA, the clinical atlas, the cancer atlas in Africa, and he did say there is a typical reliance often to go straight to clinical partners when it comes to recruitment because they need detailed clinical data. But when I asked him about the power of patient advocates, he said, well, that's actually a really good point, you know, that patient advocates could, practically speaking, be organizing cancer awareness events in their region where, the Cancer Atlas is trying to operate, and invite them to present the project to the community and really get them involved as well. So I think there's really the potential to kind of change the way in which we're doing some things, bring the role of the patient advocates in, more broadly, that there's really an application that perhaps we're not thinking about enough. And just lastly, the fact that there's a resolution, on the table right now around precision oncology looming around at WHO. I mean, that's really exciting. I think we need to kind of use tools like that as well to kind of build some more momentum and kind of collective action between us, because things like that can be very helpful for us as well. I'm just going to hand it over to Ranjit. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it is very important to have clinical trials in low and middle income countries, because firstly, we want to make sure that whatever medication eventually is developed, it's also already tried in low and middle income countries, because maybe our genetic makeup and size of the patient and everything else is different. And the other thing, of course, is retaining our expertise, our clinical expertise within the country, because there's a lot more improvement of our clinicians when clinical trials are done in our countries. But my dilemma is, when the clinical trial has ended, how is the patient going to afford the treatment? That's what worries me.
Yeah, if I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I can go like this. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. First of all, it is a well-known best practice that if a company is not planning to commercialize their drug in that country, they should not run a clinical trial, because they have to make sure that after the trial, these patients are going to have access. And that kicks out like half the countries in the world where companies usually don't think they're going to commercialize their drugs. And then on the other hand, the regulatory system and the regulatory agencies, the process is, these companies, even I have seen companies that, we're working with them to expand the clinical trial footprint. There are no incentives, because they have to move so fast. They have to ensure the data and the quality of the data. And so everything goes against expanding access to the footprint, the geographical footprint of clinical trials. And I'm glad WHO and IFPMA are working on this, because it's not a very easy problem to solve, and everybody goes back at the end. I have been surprised in the past few years that we had learned nothing out of COVID, and I haven't seen not one intervention that stayed after COVID in anything. We went exactly back to where we were before. So I do think this is a whole other area, and of course, well beyond breast cancer. So something that we have to work at a different level.
Okay, we've got a
Perhaps-
few. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, perhaps to complicate things further, the regulators now are demanding that every trial has a certain percentage of patients from a certain country. So for example, the FDA will not approve a drug unless you have a certain percentage of the patients in the trial being from the US. The same for Germany and the same for other countries. So if you do like that, then there are not a lot of room to include low middle income countries. And again, like Pat says, we need to start yelling, and I think we yell much better if the patient and the patient advocates are with us, saying that this is unfair.
We don't have much time left, because we're going to have to wrap up quite soon. The one I'm going to pick out, I think, is someone is saying, how do we encourage diagnostic companies to step in the way that pharma has? Is that something that anyone here would like to respond to? Vanessa, that's not an area, you don't deal with the diagnostics industry.
No, but I mean, I think, this has been an ongoing question. It's not the first time I've come across it. I mean, I think there are many challenges to this. One is that, of course, the pharmaceutical industry, we've been fortunate enough to have a sort of mature trade association in place that kind of facilitates, global discussions where we can come in, and of course that isn't necessarily easy to come by in terms of a diagnostic equivalent. I think, we need to kind of crack our heads together a bit more to bring diagnostics and medtech to the table in a much more proactive manner. I think WHO as well has been, at the forefront of trying to achieve that in different disease areas. And I think, that's still something that we need to think harder about, be more creative about. But for sure, as speaking for pharma, we really are keen to see other private sector counterparts be around the table. Like it's really quite critical. It's really, you all have said it's not about the medicines, and I think that's obviously very apparent. But now, where are the folks that kind of can sit and come up with the solutions? Sort of our counterparts. So yeah, Andre, I know you have all the answers to that. So I'll just hand over to you.
Oh, Vanessa, not the nicest setup, but I think your points are entirely right and valid. One of the challenges, though, is we also have to help create that market at the country and at the facility level, because if we're not clear, speaking with one voice as a cancer community, that diagnostics is part of that cancer package, then we're going to find that they won't be available. I mean, the purchasers need to be governments through the domestic budget, because we cannot rely on the generosity of companies to solve the problem. The companies can help solve the problem. There is no doubt of that. But we have to help create a stable and commercial market that's sustainable. There's a lot of great innovation that's happening, and many of us are trying to facilitate those discussions with diagnostic companies. Although it is important to note, one of the challenges is that we're talking about a hugely heterogeneous set of companies. When you consider diagnostic imaging, pathology, genomic sequencing, circulating tumors, I mean, it's not one association, one cohort. So we need to speak with one voice. We need to reinforce, because there are still many countries, when we look at what governments are reimbursing, there are many countries that will reimburse the treatment and not reimburse the diagnostics. And without addressing that fundamental problem, speaking with one voice as advocates, clinicians, and policymakers, we won't be surprised if there's no market. So yes, let's bring the companies to the table. Many are ready. I agree that there is a problem of convergence, but we're helping solve that together. But let's also remember that this needs to come from a sustainable commercial market that works for everyone, and that it's not a big ask. So we will move together. But again, we need to push governments to make the right investments in cancer care.
And maybe, Anna, for the advocates that are listening to us, one thing that could be done would be awareness, raising awareness of the importance of diagnostics, and raising awareness not just among the general public, among all the decision makers, the politicians and all those who take decisions in the country. Because there are examples, even we know, and Pat and I, we know of an example in Africa, for example, where the government reimburses a PET CT, but not the pathology for a biopsy. So there needs to be awareness and education of the fundamental role of diagnostics. And then, like Andre said, there will set the scene that you cannot reimburse the drug and not the test that goes with the drug. And so I think there's a lot that advocates can help us in this education of decision makers.
Thanks very much. I think we're going to have to close very soon. So I'm happy to take closing remarks from everybody really, really quickly, about 30 seconds max. And then Fatima, do you want to say the thanks and do the closing up? I think these have been great questions. I think nothing has shown more obviously that you look at your whole patient pathway and you spot the problems and fight for those. But above all, you make alliances, because advanced breast cancer patients are not going to sort precision medicine by themselves. You're not going to sort health budgets by yourself, reimbursement principles and putting patient care first. That's a wide alliance. And you have to do that together. So that's certainly a big message that I take from this. Can we go quickly round and get summing up messages from people? Ranjit, should we start with you?
I just think that advocacy has to be done in a more of a teamwork basis, so that we have clinicians and the public as well. Because social media is one way that we can inform everyone that, this is what's going on and how we can work together. And I found that the younger people are people who actually come up with some very innovative ideas for us to do advocacy. We need to listen to them as well. So I think that besides just patient advocates, the others have to get together to really get it. Otherwise, it is very overwhelming for us as patient advocates to do this alone, because sometimes we end up at the bottom of the decision making, and even then we are just being included as a token. So I would say there is still so much to do. Over to you.
Pat?
Yeah, I'll be short. Maybe 2 words. Do something. Do something. Right? Don't just talk. Do something good today. You know, we haven't talked about the big elephant in the room, which is the changes in the geopolitical environment and what it means to all of us. And many people I see are paralyzed. So the best thing that you can do, I don't know if it's going to solve the whole problem, but find something that you see you can solve and do something. Thank you.
Excellent point. Vanessa?
Yeah, it's hard to follow Pat on that one. I think just to say, you know, let's be more strategic. Like, let's try and find ways to work together and kind of go for the same goals, but really start tying up together and joining up and being much more strategic across the board. Thanks.
Andre?
Yeah, a great comment. So just to build on what has been said, for the do something, just one concrete thing, go to governments. Government officials will want to solve problems if you help them understand what the problem is. And we all know with breast cancer, there's a very strong social, economic, and health justification for why it matters. Just knock on doors until someone opens it. So when we talk about do something, start by just going to government officials. You will find at least some receptive audience. The second 2 words is tell us. Please tell us. Let us meet again and have advocates present to us and clinicians present to us what you've done. We have a shared responsibility. So do something and tell us when you do something so we can celebrate you, augment you, and then learn from you. Please just tell us. Measure and tell us again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andre. And that's, I think, something Fatima is going to talk about now, because not only do we want you to do a sort of exit survey to say about this webinar, we actually do want you advocates who are listening to think about the possibilities that have been raised for your own work and at least send us a plan. What have you learned from it? What do you want to do? What are the steps that would work for you that you are going to want to work on? And that's something that I think would be really useful to share with one another. Practical, do something. What is it you want to do? Let's hear from it. So Fatima, do you want to sum up for us now?
Yes. And I'll go very briefly on the 2 first slides because we have just discussed all these points, but this will be emailed to all of you. And just a summary, map your patient journey, understand where the bottleneck is in your own country, because they may be different, and use that information to create awareness among the local authorities and stakeholders. Find the right industry, and perhaps we should have put here and diagnostic partners, so that they both can be brought to the table. Understand how changes in taxation, like Ranjit explained, how can that help? Identify the right publication opportunities. Sometimes we can choose to go on influential journals, but sometimes we can also go through media coverage, and they reach different public, and they both can be very powerful. And then encourage the governments to see beyond just the medicines, what everything else that is necessary. And so for continue in terms of advocates, be present, like Andre just mentioned. You need to be there, and not just as a token, like Ranjit said, but really as a partner, as a member that is listened to in all the different discussions, starting with the national control plan, but also further on which medicines should be available. Use community-driven advocacy campaigns. There's a lot that can be done there. And if you need help, contact Andre. No, contact the WHO offices, and so that they can you together with them. And also, of course, when it's specifically to metastatic breast cancer, the ABC Global Alliance and the Max Foundation, we are also there to help, so that your voices can be heard. And for clinicians, there are a couple of you on the line. Please do something like Pat told you. do something. Don't just complain. We tend to complain, clinicians, but let's do something about it. So treat according to guidelines. Look at the international guidelines, adapt it in your own country, and use that as your guide for the country to do the best that you can with the resources that you have. And then build the capacity so that you can have one day clinical trials in your own country. Be very aware of quality. You know, there's a lot that we don't have time to go through that, but sometimes quality of care, the benefit that brings is even bigger than a new drug. So the quality of care, and both ASCO and ESMO have programs, particularly ASCO COPI has programs to help low middle income countries improve the quality of care. And then, you know, talk to your Minister of Health, ask them to reach out to WHO, because there are programs that need that request from the Minister of Health, and then WHO can go and help establish the capacity building that is necessary. And so the last point is thanking everybody for joining us. We will be emailing you the summary of these tools and also a link to the webinar. We want to hear from you, so please take just a minute to complete the survey to tell us if this was useful. Help us understand your expectations. And if you want to know more about all these topics, please use Adele Gauthier email that is over there. And we also want to thank, well, personally, I want to thank to all the speakers. I want to thank Anna for the great moderation, and Adele for all the work behind this webinar, as well as ProMeditech for the support. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.